Hello Internet, we are back and we welcome here Frans van Staden. He's a 3-2 battalion member at Wellbeing. Today he's a psychologist, and there's nothing wrong with being a psychologist. This is the second episode. I know that all of us out there who served, we have a bit of views upon psychologists which are wrong, and I'm sure you'll tell us why it's wrong. But today I want to speak about 3 different things. The one is anger issues, and then survival guilt, and then lastly, depression. And would you believe all of these things actually run together? Now, what I've asked Frans about it is, I myself have the symptoms of all of that. I would walk down the street and I look at the guy for no reason. I thought, okay, I'll sort you out. And then I forget, when I'm middle 50s, and I'll probably see my ass. And survival guilt, I don't think there's any one of us listening here today who has not wondered why your friend next to you died, or why did you not die, or perhaps you were only wounded, or whatever you feel. Especially, I've seen it in the police as well, where we had to attend funerals all the time. And you're standing there and you see the parents crying, because we were young men, the parents were my age now. And you see the sister crying, the wife. And there's a whole joke that now she's a rich widow and you have to go for her, but that's just a joke. It's not true, it's nonsense. You're standing there. And then at some stage late at night, you realize there's something wrong with you. And then you realize you've got depression. You just don't see no future in life. Everything to you is unimportant and you just can't break out of it. It's a horrible place to be. And there's some people who will say to you, just man up, you weet kom by, word groot. It doesn't help. It doesn't help. And that's when you turn to people like Frans. So Frans, I don't know if I summarized that correctly to you, but it's over to you. Thank you again for being here. I just want to say Frans work in Afrikaans as well. We're just doing this in English so that we can reach more people from the other forces as well, like say MK, whoever who's listening here. He is helping everybody, but he can do it in Afrikaans too.
Chris, thank you very much. And again, thank you for the work that you're doing. And I would like to encourage all veterans from all sides of the struggle to really go and think about what are they experiencing and how are they managing their thoughts, their emotions, and how are they practicing utmost self-care in their lives. The war's over for us. The physical war's over, but the mental and the emotional war is carrying on. So, Chris, thank you for selecting anger issues, survivor guilt, and depression, because all 3 are also symptoms of PTSD in some or other way. And the 3 topics are related and work mostly at the interaction between our thoughts, which is our memories, our beliefs, our assumptions, some of those things that happen unconsciously and influence us in the moment, almost before we are aware of this. And then obviously the interaction with the emotions, because these processes can either create positive cycles or negative cycles. In other words, if you start thinking negatively about the person, a situation, about the intentions of people, in other words, you make negative assumptions, then your brain already goes into that fight-flight processes of protecting yourself or being over alert and hyper vigilant. So we've got the thoughts, the emotions, and then of course the biological or the physical effects of these interactions. So we must always remember, if I keep my thoughts positive, then I can keep my emotions under control. If I allow my emotions to run, then as somebody said, you can't lose or get rid of your temper if you lose it all the time. That's the one thing you can't get rid of. So if our emotions start running, then I think we have already lost the game. And that obviously has an impact on our breathing and our heart rate and all the stress hormones that are secreted in that process. So I think if we think across all three of these topics, as individuals, I think we must believe that we have the power to make decisions in the here and now and in this world, even if they are not major decisions, but we have got choices and we can still make decisions. We can make decisions to think differently about the situation, that our thoughts and our views and our assumptions are just that. It is our view of the world, and that others may have a different view, and that is also okay. You may have 5 people observing an accident, and if the police come and take statements from 5 people, they will get 5 different stories. And that is exactly what is happening in our world. We see a situation in a certain way, and then we cannot understand why people see it differently. And you can think of all the political events in the past 2 years of how people disagreed on many levels. If we think about the decisions around COVID, and for us in Southern Africa, the harsh decisions that have been made very rapidly in the past week by by people internationally, politicians, to basically cut off the tourist lifeline of what we so dearly need in South Africa. And that is just because they are seeing the whole COVID development with Omicron now as a major threat, and we are still learning about the real net effects of that. So we also need to know that others' emotions are their emotions, and their emotions do not have to affect us. If somebody is having a bad day, they're already losing it. It doesn't have to rub off on us. So we are individuals, and whatever happens somewhere else, or what somebody's saying to me or doing to somebody else, does not have to affect us, unless you have to step in and then, display some defensive anger, to protect somebody who's weaker. Now, that's a different situation. But if somebody else is having a bad day, it shouldn't stuff up our day. So it's all about saying, I need to manage my thoughts to check that they are accurate. In other words, calibrate them so that I'm aware of the emotions that I'm having, that they are relevant to the situation, and that obviously that I can calm down my heart rate and limit the adrenaline secretion that possibly happens. So what I'm also saying is, something is in your control, as I said in the first session, then do something about it. If something is out of my hands, then it should be out of my mind as well. In other words, if there's something, back to Covey's circle of influence and circle of concern, if something is in my circle of influence, then I do something about it. I make a plan, I act, and I deal with it. If something is out of my circle of influence and it needs to be on the circle of concern, then I need to say, then it is on God's list or on the universe's list, so that you do not waste your time on it. So be aware. Emotions, thinking, thoughts, and the physical impact of that are closely related. So if we take anger issues, survivor guilt, depression, as I said earlier, they're part of the symptoms of PTSD. So if we now go to anger issues and we start thinking of our days in training, if we think of our military, police, or emergency work training, what were the emotions that we were typically taught or socialized to focus on? And which were the ones we were compelled in that training, especially in the first 6 months, I guess, of our training. We still had lots of emotions, but we realized which of these emotions we could display and which were not acceptable to display. But we were compelled to suppress or ignore some emotions, and others we had to swallow, and sometimes swallow big emotions if we felt, yeah, I don't want to be here, or I want to, I'm a bit afraid, or I'm wet and I'm gatvol, as we say, tired, fed up. And that sometimes there's the emotions that we had to focus on to survive in a military or emergency space were often some of those that were not highly rated in a civilian environment. And therefore, when you come back on leave, or you come back permanently into a civilian life, it feels that there's a disconnect in terms of your ability to access anger, your ability to quickly respond to situations, to expect that there's a respect for your orders, even in the family. I caught myself often that I became angry when some of my orders were not executed immediately, or things were not done in the way that I would have done it. That we realize that we need to manage our anger, and that our anger comes from that training. So in 1981, when I started my military training, it was all about physical fitness and teamwork and altruism. In other words, the group and the mission are more important than the individual. We had to do all those immediate action drills so that it became part of your muscle memory. We had to do immediate execution of commands, or otherwise, you suffered. You had to go and do extra PT or do extra service if you did not execute on the commands of your superiors. So there was aggression and anger on call. And I think many veterans who were in contact situations will be able to confirm this. One moment you're still drinking your coffee, or you're preparing your meal, or you're just sitting resting, and the next moment the lead is flying over your head, and you go into immediate action drills. So in addition to anger on demand and aggression on demand, we also had to have anger or loathing for our enemy, so that we can act decisively against the enemy. Or I almost want to say not against him or her, but against it. Because in many ways, our enemy was depersonalized. And that is what happens in any conflict situation. The negative image of your enemy, and the fact that your enemy is just a normal person like you, is that image is eroded, and you are being told that your enemy is X, Y, and is going to do this to your women and children, etc. And we had to also control our fear. So what would you have? Aggression and anger on call. Hold back on your fear. See your enemy as not being as good as and important as you are. And then the other important part was the enjoyment of the camaraderie, and the fact that your unit and your platoon and your section and your company and your battalion became your family, and that you focused your attention on protecting your team, and then anybody else. So let's take an example of that. During the Second World War, one of the B-17 bombers that was doing a lot of bombing of Germany was severely damaged, and it started struggling back. And a German fighter obviously wanted to attack it, and then it realized that this B-17 was very damaged, and it actually escorted it until it got to the English Channel, as I remember correctly. And when these people landed back, this aircraft landed back in England, they related the story to the powers that be. And that story was suppressed until much later because of the fact that we did personalize our enemy, that we did not want to send that message that there was honor between enemies. And I think just to end that story, years later, they met up, and I think the German pilot lived in Canada and the US pilot lived in Oregon, or the northern part of the US, and they met up. So what we need to understand is that anger was good, and the whole range of other emotions was not always something that was supported, and that was not always rewarded. So this is the environment that we became soldiers and where we became veterans. So if we now go and you think a little bit more about other emotions like anger. In the 1970s, Ekman determined that there are 5 main categories of emotions: enjoyment, sadness, fear, anger, and disgust. So anger was already one of the basic emotions that existed, according to the research, and it shows that it is a basic emotion where that pops up the moment that we feel that we are physically or psychologically in danger. That could be psychological danger, is that the possibility of embarrassment, humiliation, or that your dignity is eroded. So with that in mind, we now see where the anger comes from. And now what happens is we're placed back in civilian life, and we've got this muscle memory to access anger. And then what happens is we go into situations where we have our own interpretation of the environment or the intentions of other people, and then the anger pops up. So I think we were not sufficiently debriefed to realize that our anger is very accessible because it was built up and it was increased in intensity for the sake of war and conflict. So if we think about what anger is, it is a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, hostility, or even rage and loathing directed at a real or a perceived or imagined person, group, or situation. I want to repeat. It's a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility, or even rage or loathing that is directed at a real, perceived, or imagined person, group, or situation. So again, what are we saying here? Sometimes we make assumptions about the intention or the behavior of somebody else, which gets the anger to pop up, and then we respond in an aggressive way that is not always positive and is not always constructive in the civilian world. So what are some typical negative emotions? Sadness, anger, loneliness, jealousy, self-criticism, fear, or rejection. These negative emotions can often be difficult and even painful at times. So what are we saying? It's very important that we, again, to summarize this piece, that we are aware of the interaction between our thoughts and how they influence our emotions. Our assumptions and our thoughts may cause a vicious or a virtuous cycle. And if we assume that the situation or person is causing a threat, then we easily move to anger and aggression. In other words, we move towards sometimes a defensive or offensive violence in order to protect what we would hold dear. And the challenge to us as veterans is to often stop and just think, is the assumption that I'm making in this moment, if this was a different situation, a different person, a different time, would this assumption still have been valid? Is this valid? So let's take a very good example. And I guess that happens in other countries as well. But road rage is quite a significant problem in South Africa. Obviously, a little bit less now with COVID and with the lockdown, but now that the numbers have taken up and increased on the roads, we're finding that a bit more often. So what is one of the main causes of road rage? It's the fact that one is waking up sometimes with not feeling great about whatever is happening in life or at work or finances or family, etc. And then we act almost sometimes like a landmine. We are charged, we are cocked, and then we make assumptions about the intention of other drivers on the road. And that means it's almost as if we assume that this taxi driver or this driver of the white German car or this vehicle or this truck woke up this morning with the intention to irritate you or to block you or to do certain things. Now, I know it has an impact on our values if we see people driving recklessly or ignoring certain road rules that have to do with safety. But I'm talking of that interpersonal situation where you have some other issue with another driver on the road. And that's often an assumption that we make. And that triggers our emotions. And then we start with that vicious cycle. Because we have anger that can easily be accessed, then this just goes into a loop. I think if you sometimes see videos of road rage, you often see how the one party makes assumptions about the other party, and then you have this vicious cycle. So the way that we need to deal with this, veterans, is through good emotional intelligence. And here I want to talk about just the work by Goldman around the emotional intelligence, and that we are aware that our assumptions often can start this vicious cycle of anger. The first is we need to know our emotions. In other words, we need to check or calibrate whether they are accurate. We need to be able to name them. And I'm happy, Chris, if we put Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions back here as an example at the later stage, perhaps, just so that we can sometimes just go around the wheel of emotions and ask ourselves, how am I feeling? What am I feeling in different times? Because that always helps if you can name the granular emotion and then ask yourself, where is this emotion coming from? Where is my anger coming from? Is it an assumption that I've made, or is there a real cause? And then obviously I am justified to have certain defensive anger or to protect what I hold dear. So I need to think about my assumptions. Do I assume that somebody has the intention to irritate me, or are they just joyful and happy and loud with their music at a certain time? Often that rumination in our brain causes us to become very angry, and then we explode. Then we need to think about our emotion. Is it suitable to the situation? Would this have been such an important issue at another time or place? In South Africa, we recently had a situation where a guest at the guest house was shot by a policeman. But if you observe the video, and it's obviously sub judice now, but if you observe it, then you can see that there's possibly a way that the person is going into a vicious cycle on both sides. And that is what we need to try to avoid, that we don't get ourselves into that emotional frenzy. We need to motivate ourselves to know that we are individuals, that we can change our decisions and that we are not dependent on the behavior of other people. We also need to recognize the emotions in other people to understand that they can be different or they can be the same, because people are unique. In the same situation, people may have different experiences. And you can often see that at events where there's a memorial event, etc., people show different emotions because we are unique and we experience life differently. And then lastly is the importance of handling relationships. Relationships are sacred. They are the connection that we need as humans. And if we sometimes get into anger unnecessarily, nobody has ever choked when they swallowed their pride. Then it's important to go and rebuild those relationships. Relationships are important for our health as people and as veterans, and nobody can go it alone. So that's my piece, Koos, at this stage about anger. Any thoughts on your side also that you may want to think about?
I've been making notes as you spoke. I have to ask you, is it possible, professionally speaking, that if you don't do anything, if you just don't go and look for help, for assistance, even if you know there's a problem, that this is just going to go away by some kind of magic? Or will your problems become worse?
I think there is a certain percentage of people that can go through traumatic events in their life and be okay afterwards. But it depends a lot, as some would say, what their village around them is doing. In other words, their loved ones. Often when people have been in a traumatic situation, if they are surrounded by loved ones, that nurturing helps. That sometimes helps for about 50% of people. The other 50% are the ones that we're worried about. And in that case, we can just encourage people to go for help. And again, my invitation is you can have a free session with me at any stage, even if you just want to find out, okay, what will happen in a conversation or in a therapeutic situation. I think the most courageous decision that any veteran can take is that first step to contact somebody and say, I just want to speak to you. And you don't have to speak to me. You can speak to any of the helpers. I have a network of helpers who are and people that I know who are military veterans and can help you. And then there, in the broader society, there are many people who deal with veteran difficulties on a daily basis. Next question. So if we now, sorry, you want to go to
Yeah, I wanted just to ask you a quick one here. Sorry about that. But I have to ask you this as a former policeman, and what if what is bothering us was perhaps illegal and unlawful and can actually constitute a major crime? And it's, of course, bothering us because we're decent human beings, but those were different days. Is there any kind of legal presumption or something upon you to go with whatever your patient is telling you to the police and to report them to anybody, or is the information safe with you?
In all instances, the information is safe with me. If the person is still continuing with a certain behavior, now let's say, and I'm going to use a worst example. Let's say the person is into pedophilia, and that means bothering little children, and it's not being stopped. Then obviously I have a duty to report that. But if it's something that happened in a military situation, and we know that the first casualty of war is the truth. The second casualty is typically our innocence and the fact that we sometimes do things that we typically would not do in a normal society. So these were abnormal times, and if somebody feels that they have guilt shame about something that happened a long time ago, please be assured that nothing needs to be shared, or in that case, it's totally privileged information. In any way, if you do the brain working recursive therapy approach, bwrt.org, if you want to go and look at it again, then it used to be called content-less therapy. In other words, you don't have to share any detail of what happened, and that you work through the problem in your own mind without having to share with the therapist. So I hope that helps to invite you to come and speak without the fear of recrimination. So the next piece I want to talk about is survivor guilt. And again, that's one of the symptoms of PTSD. So, and I want to relate, one or two events that happened with me in my national service. So in 1981, I did my first training here at the School of Infantry at Oudtshoorn. And then I volunteered to go to 32 Battalion, and I was then placed in Alpha Company in early 1982. Now, at 32 Battalion, there were sometimes extra leaders, and I'm talking now of second lieutenants and corporals in the platoons, because of the January-July schedules of national service. So, and excuse my language, because you can edit this out, but they would call us, the spare dicks. In other words, we were the ones that were understudies of the platoon commanders that would have cleared out or would have finished their service 6 months later. So, and because 32 Battalion had quite a turnover, or sometimes suffered significant losses of the leader group, we needed some extra leaders in a year. So in early March 1982, about 4 days before Operation Super, at that stage I was in platoon Alpha 4. I was moved to Delta 16 to be platoon commander, as there wasn't an unplanned shortage of leaders. So 4 days before we moved into the operational theater, I had to get used to a new platoon. Fortunately, I had a wonderful Sergeant Segunda, and Tomo Thompson as the 2IC was actually then training me to be a platoon commander. Just for the record, I could navigate. As they typically say, the confusion is a second lieutenant with a compass. So we were then moved to Ruakana Air Force Base, and that is when Operation Super happened around the 13th of March. So my challenge was then to sit with Delta Company at the base and know that the Alpha Company platoon that I was part of 4 days ago were basically in the firefight. And that for me was very hard, because I experienced amazing guilt, and I had to sort of hold myself back not to get onto a Puma and go and join the fight. So when we lost Phil Stewart as one of the 3 people that we lost on the day from Alpha Company, initially his body was mistaken for somebody else because of the black camouflage cream. But when we carried the body bag, we were still thinking that it was somebody else. I felt the guilt that I was not in the fight with them. And that is typically what one feels. You become so part of a team that their pain is your pain. And that again happened in 9 and 10 August 1982. Those are dates that are permanently etched in my memory. That was during Operation Meerbos in the Kuvelai area. And unfortunately, some decisions were made that placed a company of 1st Parachute Battalion in harm's way. At that stage, there were 4 Alouette gunships, and Neil Ellis and Harry, I can't remember his surname, were 2 of the gunship pilots. And there was a Alouette commander spotter helicopter as well as 8 Puma transport helicopters at the Hague, helicopter admin area, or gebied in Afrikaans. So the decision was then taken that the D company was airlifted and deployed for search and destroy. So the 8 choppers were flying, and thereafter they went back and they picked up the Parabats. And an hour after I flew in the Puma with Captain Guy Twaddle and the team, that same aircraft was shot down. So for many years, I said to myself, why did it happen to them and not to me? I felt a bit of saying, you know, how lucky was I at that stage? The problem was that there were 9 14,5 anti-aircraft guns deployed in the Kuvelai area by the 3 battalions of SWAPO that came together. And that concentrated fire obviously took down that Puma immediately. So all the 3 crew of the Puma and the 12 bats lost their lives. And at that stage, when we heard about the event, our company commander, Harry Ferreira, insisted that the company gets deployed and that we go and take on the enemy. So the request was that Delta Company was the closest to the scene and that they should come and pick us up, drop the bats, pick us up, and that we could have a company that was fresh to go into the fight. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, and Harry was even threatened with court-martial if he continued to insist on that in that direction. Now, in retrospect, one realizes that it was also about the possibility that we could have lost many lives on our side, and I think that was the first priority. So the next day, my platoon and then Meyer's platoon made up the main force for the attack, and we took on the hastily prepared positions of the enemy, and we were fortunate in that day that apart from Harry and I, who got burned through unfortunate fires that existed, that none of there were no injuries on our side for the whole day. But I think for a long time it bothered me that I felt that maybe we could have done something better. And I think that's typically the survivor guilt that people have. You know, we felt remorse that we could not have moved in the previous day and maybe saved some of our Parabat friends. But we still, you know, we knew that they were killed instantly when we read the reports later on. But that's typically what happens with survivor guilt. You have a guilt, you always say, if I could have done this, if this would have happened. And I think that typically happens to a lot of veterans. If you see your buddy being injured, your buddy being killed, you know, your friends bleeding, getting lost. I think sometimes missing in action is even worse than, you know, seeing your buddy killed in action, because you're not certain for a long time what happened to them. So how do we deal with survivor guilt? Because a lot of that is an unfair evaluation of your actions at that moment. You know, you need to ask yourself, who is truly responsible for the event? You know, who is actually to blame? You know, sometimes we have survivor guilt in civilian life when we have acts of God, you know, some earthquakes, tsunamis, you know, other events, aircraft that fall, accidents, etc. And it's important that we should not take the blame for that loss, and that we should rather turn that around to mourn those that were affected, and to recognize that we only did what we could do in that moment, and that you couldn't be a superhuman being. I think another thing is that we need to understand that we can deal with the grief, and that we need to grieve, and that it's healthy to grieve, and that's the only way to recover from that loss. You know, if not, there's the risk that we face of having alcohol and drug abuse, and that is not necessarily the way in which you deal with problems. Think about how your family and your friends and your other brothers would have thought if you were lost. They would have felt the loss. And I think it's important that you think about how they love you, and they would have, how they devastated they would have felt if you were lost. So another one, and that is luck. You know, we as Delta Company on the 9th were picked up and dropped off in an area. You know, SWAPO plan became aware that we were flying across the area, and they were obviously ready on their 14.5s. So when the Parabats, you know, followed almost the same route, you know, it unfortunately just happened with them, but it could have possibly happened to us as well. So luck sometimes is also random. We can't determine who, you know, has the short end of the stick on a day. I think if one is experiencing that survivor guilt, I think one needs to talk to someone. But it's also important that you do something significant and positive for somebody else. In other words, to go and honor the friends and the comrades that you lost, and that you create that sense of purpose and direction by honoring your buddies. And then I think it's very important that you keep on practicing self-care, that you need to know that you have survived that event, that you must take care of yourself physically, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally, and that you sleep, that you exercise, and that you connect with buddies, that you talk about those feelings of guilt, and that you realize that this is irrational, and that it's unfair to feel guilty about situations that you couldn't control. So, Chris, yeah, that's my thought. These are some of my thoughts around survivor guilt. I don't know if you have any comments or questions around that.
Well, let me ask a difficult question, Frans, if you don't mind. What if you were guilty? I recall, and I don't want to go into details, where the explosives went off too early. Just a few seconds, but sadly, it caused loss of life. It disrupted our entire plan. What happens then? How would you deal with that? It's not really survivor guilt, is it? It's more like guilt.
But it's still, you know, I think fighting a war, working with explosives, working with ammunition, moving into areas, and I think in this case, I guess you also would refer to the special forces, where you would sometimes move into areas that you know, you are the first people on the ground, or somebody else did the recce, and you're going to go in there, but you don't know what reinforcements they've had, what changes they've made, you know, what hazards they've prepared for you. You know, something in war, I think loss of life is always at risk. So I think in a case like that, I would invite a veteran to just have a fair and objective point of view, to say that injury and premature detonations are things that often happen. If we did not bring the Mirages in to bomb the 14.5s and causing the veld fires that burned myself and Harry Ferreira on the day, then we may have lost more of our men by if they used the 14.5s in a ground roll. So because we were attacking over quite an open area, so they could have engaged us at 300-400 meters, and we had no weapons apart from our 60 mils mortars to engage the enemy in defense, because the AKs, were not effective at 400 meters or so. So sometimes, one makes the best decisions, but one takes the risk to know that in special forces, even during training, you can lose your life, because that is the fine decisions that you need to make, to engage the enemy and to achieve your goal. So lastly, I just want to talk about depression, and depression is the black dog, as some people would call it, and that there, depression is a common and sometimes a pervasive illness that 10% or more of veterans often suffer from. And if you think, the Vietnam veterans, for some reason, suffered more from it. And I think the more recent veterans, in the Middle East and Afghanistan also, struggle a lot with that. And again, depression is one of the symptoms of PTSD. So, typically what happens with the depression is that you have that feeling that life is just not worth it. And if you think of the common types of depression, clinical depression is the persistent depressed mood or loss of interest in activities, and it really impairs you. You can't really live your life. Some people have a milder sort of depression. It's not as severe as clinical depression. And then you've got the guys who have these mood swings, as if I call it that, ranging from depressive lows to manic highs. And those are the people who sometimes, when they're feeling good and they're happy, you should take the credit cards and other financial instruments away from them, because they make sometimes bad decisions. They get involved in affairs. They buy cars and they buy stuff that they don't need. I've heard of people, would buy almost half the shop of a curio shop in the Kruger National Park because the person was in a manic episode at that stage, and they just had to pay their debt afterwards. And then obviously we also get things like postnatal depression that mothers have after childbirth, that it's like you feel that you've lost your sense of purpose, your mojo, and you just don't see that you valuable in this world. Now, a problem with this, with survivor's guilt and even with anger, is that, again, that you need to manage your mind in this, because if you're not managing your thoughts, it means it creates anxiety, or sometimes there's anxiety because of past events. And that means that you get into a vicious cycle sometimes of, I feel anxious, therefore I can't sleep. And then my anxiety increases, and then the depression gets going. Because if there's too much anxiety and stress, it means that your neurotransmitters are depleted. The serotonin, the dopamine, the oxytocin, all of the neurotransmitters that are necessary for your brain to function properly. So depression is often something that is, unfortunately, the biggest, I think, problem in our society as well. People feel that they lose their mojo, their energy, And some of those things are from the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. And again, I'm not saying go and test yourself because that, but if you're having that and you've had that for some time, rather go and ask for help. But it's a persistent, sad, anxious, or empty mood, loss of interest or pleasure in hobbies and activities that were once enjoyed, including sex. So if you're not feeling up to that, then that's one thing that you need to go and check. Yes, we are all getting older and things like that, and that, blowfitter rule that they supposedly put in our coffee. I know it's starting to work nowadays, but I'm not talking about that. Feelings of hopelessness and pessimism, feelings of guilt, worthlessness, helplessness, for example, can't sleep or you struggle to get, wake up sometimes, or you wake up early in the morning, or you wake up sometime in the night. So appetite, that's sometimes, either overeating or undereating. Fatigue, feeling run down, irritable, suicidal thoughts of death or suicide. Sometimes people think the world will be better without me. If I get out of the way, then the insurance will be much better for my family. It's not true. You leave a big, massive hole and lots of questions for many years. Can't concentrate. Remember, you don't want to make decisions. You avoid contact with your social circle. Some people sit at home and they just watch TV and they don't talk to people or family. Those are the things that if you're there, go for help. Now, the causes of that could be a number of things. Sometimes it is really because of a lot of stress and anxiety that you are feeling, that your neurotransmitters are depleted. And that's a typical major depression. Then you have the physical and the emotional symptoms and the mental symptoms as a result. But sometimes it can also be caused by life events, the experiences that you had in the military or in other situations, or observing traumatic events. It could be illness. Often I say to people seeing me for depression, go and have all your bloods checked. Let's check. Sometimes certain diseases also cause depression. Then medication, wrong medication or continued medication, drugs, or alcohol. Alcohol is very bad. It increases your depression, and it affects your ability to focus. And then it could also be personality factors, self-criticism, low optimism, low self-esteem, focusing on the negative. You see, if you, again, think of how the mind works. If you focus on the negative things in life, then you are going to become depressed. But what we are talking about here, depression, is that it's a continuous bad stage or severe up and downs. Now, we all have up and downs sometimes. Sometimes a Monday starts great and then the Tuesday is crap. And then, we do have those days. But this is now severe, ongoing for a long period. And if you're not certain, there are some scales that you can look on Dr. Google on the internet to do a self-evaluation. But again, I'm saying, go to a professional if you're not certain. Don't try to self-medicate. So what do we do with treatment? And there are obviously different schools. But as a start, it's also always important to get, if the person's not sleeping, to help the person just for a short period to get back into a sleeping pattern. That means that you need to ensure that you look at your sleep hygiene. In other words, stop looking on your phone or on a laptop for an hour before you want to go to bed. Go and take a shower, take a ritual, create a ritual of sleep hygiene to prepare yourself for bed. Sleep is very important, but if your sleep hygiene and your pattern of preparing for bed and calming down is not working, then go and see a doctor to help to get you something to sleep, so that we can see if the sleep is not if it improves, whether your mood improves. But often people may need antidepressants for time, and it doesn't mean that you need to have it forever. There are some people who have got a genetic disposition. They may sometimes need it for longer or sometimes permanently, but that is something that one will decide with a doctor and a psychiatrist to ensure that you get the best medication. But the intention is never to keep you on it. It's just to help you over the worst so that you can continue rebuilding your life and continue working further. So antidepressants are typically the ones that relieve symptoms of depression, social anxiety, disorders, and so on. But then we also have psychotherapy, and there are cognitive and behavioral therapies that you can use. And typically, I like to work with a psychiatrist to see whether if we can deal with the psychological effects of it or the psychological causes of depression, whether at some stage we can change the medication. But very important, manage your thoughts and emotions. Practice the self-care by physical activity and exercise. Do the things that fill your cup, that really makes you feel better about yourself, even if it is, go and sweep the pool or sweep the garden or work in the garden. They often say, again, as I work on the garden works on me. And that's very true. Connect with people and with situations that make you feel better. Find reasons to live again and find that purpose in your life. And sometimes, often at our age, we lose our purpose. We've probably started retiring. We feel that we've lost our title and our status and things like that. Be aware of that we are saying, you know what, for the people around you that love you, you're still the person that they look up to and has been a role model in their lives. So if you feel that you're losing that purpose, then you can go and find that again. It's okay to have down days, but then up days can be enjoyed and remembered. Ask for help, friends, comrades, family, and professional people. And then, again, I want to just focus on self-care. Remove the causes, rest, sleep, manage your anxiety, because that anxiety may keep you awake at night. And then remove those people or situations that slow you down, that really taps your energy, taps your will to enjoy life, because you get those people. And if there are people that really suck the life out of you, then rather put them on your B or your C list. Lastly, find your purpose in life. We all have values. We live according to values. Go and find yourself, find out what are the values that you live to, so that you are very clear about that, because that helps us when we are making decisions. Create a gratitude list. We all have things to be grateful for, whether we are financially in a good position or not, whether we are employed or not, whether we've lost employment, whether bad things have happened to us. We still have certain things that we can feel grateful for. And then, somebody said one day, life is very hard. And then somebody said, but compare it to death. How hard is it then? And that is the invitation to you. You've done your duty. You have fulfilled your purpose in life. You still have value to the community. You still have value to your family, and also to your comrades, to your friends, to people in your community. You still have roles that you can fulfill as a veteran to make this a better community. I feel I want to jump off the soapbox. I hope this was helpful. Any comments, questions, Chris?
Well, I want to thank you, Frans. I was listening to you and I felt so much better. And I'm not sarcastic, I really do. Because for me, I want to understand why I feel like things like that, because sometimes it just attacks you. I mean, something happens and you just go through all these symptoms. Myself, I will admit guilt. But now I have to ask you something. being in an argument with a fellow veteran. And he asked me to ask you, is psychology from the devil? Is it anti-religion, anti-God? Are you interfering where God should actually be working?
Well, I know my place when I'm in a relationship with God. I know how small I am and that my job is just to try to heal. I think in many religions that there were always healers, and that the intention of many of the religions is to honor God and to know your place in your relationship to God. So I can just say, psychology, if somebody is saying that psychology is from the devil, then any of the sciences, would be of the devil. Any of the helping sciences, that means that don't drink vitamin C, don't drink any of the vitamins, don't take a headache tablet if you have a headache. I don't think that there is a risk. Yes, let me change that. There is a risk that as we proceed with scientific discovery, sometimes that man can become arrogant, and man can think that you don't have a God or don't need a God. And then obviously sharing now part of my belief system. But I don't see that in trying to help people or heal people, that you are trying to play God. I'm not doing miracle work. Sometimes I'm delighted and I'm very grateful if there is a miracle that happens to me after therapy, when a client does say, you know what, this or that cause of my problem has been resolved, I'm moving on, then I feel that I'm adding value. So yeah, I would love to have a conversation with a person like that, and just not try to convince, but try to understand where the person is coming from. But yes, I know my place in this world, and I'm definitely not trying to play God.
Frans, thank you. As I said before, I feel better now. And I feel a lot of us listening here feel better as well. But I think you will feel better if people start contacting you. And also, if you people listening here, just leave us questions below. And then we will know what to talk about in the next one. This is a service. And it's a free service. And it can be in Afrikaans or it can be in English. But you have to do something. You have to reach out. And I will leave you on that note. Reach out to Frans. Let us get you healed. Until we meet again, God bless.